How do you apologize to fans for making a movie that they found incredibly disappointing? Well, that's easy. Make a sequel like they did with A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, where they bring Wes Craven, writer and director of the original, writing the screenplay for it. Also, one of the writers of the film is Frank Darabont, director of The Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, The Mist, and the guy who actually adapted The Walking Dead from comics to TV. Yeah, in my opinion, that last one's probably his worst thing he's done. With this film, they actually carried on the original story, bringing back Nancy and her dad. They literally completely ignore the previous film. The film is set 6 years after the original. The film opens up with a scene showing us a young girl called Kristen, who's played by Patricia Arquette in her first movie role, making a replica house of the original Elm Street house. She makes it because she's having dreams of Freddy taking her to that house. The opening scene in this isn't as good as the previous two films and is kinda slow. So she goes to sleep, and in her dream she goes to the bathroom, goes to turn on the tap, and it grabs onto her hand. We then see Freddy in the mirror. The other tap turns into a claw and it slits Kristen's wrist. Her mother walks in as Kristen wakes up with a slit wrist and a razor in her hand. Her mother then places her in a psychiatric hospital. She then meets the other patients at the hospital, Joey, who doesn't speak, Taryn, who's an ex-drug addict, Roland, a kid with behavioural problems, Philip, who is suffering nightmares, Jennifer, who wants to be a TV star, and I don't really know much about her backstory, and Will, who is in a wheelchair after attempting suicide. They are the last of the so-called Elm Street children, who are all having nightmares of Freddy, but all of them have somehow survived until this movie. That's quite lucky if you ask me. Kristen then meets Nancy, who recently started working in the hospital as a research scientist. Kristen has another dream where she ends up almost being fully eaten by Freddy as a massive wormy snake thing. She then pulls Nancy into her dream. Nancy eventually gets rid of Freddy and they both wake up. Nancy realizes that ability can be used to kill Freddy for good. Then Freddy kills Philip by slashing his feet and wrists, moving him like a puppet by his tendons. He takes him to the top of a building while everyone is screaming for him. Freddy then cuts the tendons and Philip falls to his death. This death scene is one of my favourites in the entire series. However, it's not as good as the next one. Jennifer falls asleep while watching TV and Freddy shows up on the TV and kills the guest of the talk show she's watching. The TV breaks up, so Jennifer goes over and smacks it. The TV spouts arm and Freddy's head comes out the top, and Freddy says one of his best one-liners in all the movies. That alone is the best part in the whole film and probably my favourite death scene in the entire series. All throughout the movie, one of the doctors called Neil keeps getting visited by this weird nun. He goes down to an abandoned wing of the hospital where she proceeds to tell him about how a woman called Amanda Kruger was locked in there for the whole Christmas holidays, where she was raped many times, and by the time she was found, she was pregnant. Yes, she's talking about Freddy's mother. She then says that Freddy was never buried and the only way that he can be stopped from entering people's dreams is by being properly buried. Oh well, it's a better reason for a death than being killed by the power of love. Nancy then says in a group session that in the kids' dreams they can be whatever they want to be in their dreams. So when they go into their dreams, they show off their different powers. It may be a little bit cheesy, but it's still fun. While in the dream, Joey sees a nurse that he had the hots for asking him over. They start making out and she bites his tongue off, revealing that she is Freddy in disguise. Freddy then takes him captive in the dream world, and in the real world he's put into a coma. Neil and Nancy are blamed for the incident and are then both fired from the hospital. Nancy then sees her father, who she's fallen out with since the events of the first movie, and asks where Freddy's corpse was. He refuses to tell her and she leaves. Neil forces him to take him to where the body was and off they go. Nancy goes off back to the hospital and gets everyone to go into the dream to get back Joey. They all get separated and put into different places in the dream. Taryn and Will are both killed in really cool death scenes that are actually made to get into the characters' heads and suit their personalities. For example, Taryn's death's in a back alley where Freddy turns his claws into syringes and kills her with it. Roland, Kristen and Nancy are all reunited when all of a sudden a door appears. They go down and see Freddy and Joey. They manage to save Joey and then Freddy reveals that he gains strength with each one of his victims. Roland attacks Freddy until he realizes that someone is messing with his grave and he disappears. We then see Neil and Nancy's dad finding Freddy's corpse in a large salvage yard. Then his corpse comes alive and fights them. The skeleton is made with stop motion and isn't as good as it should be. In fact, it is a little bit cheesy, but hey, I've seen much worse. The skeleton then kills Nancy's dad and knocks out Neil with a shovel. We then see Nancy and the kids go to a room full of mirrors, all with Freddy's face on. Freddy is taunting the kids. He pulls all of them inside the mirror except for Joey, who then screams so loudly that Freddy disappears from each one of the mirrors and the kids come back. Then Nancy's dad appears as a spirit and said that he crossed over to say goodbye to Nancy. They hug and then Nancy is stabbed and it's revealed that it's actually Freddy, not her dad. He goes to attack Kristen, but Nancy comes up behind him and makes him stab himself with his own glove. At that exact time, Neil wakes up and sprinkles holy water on Freddy's corpse and then fully buries him. Freddy then disappears and then Nancy dies. Yes, Nancy, the survivor from the original film, dies. I guess that's just so they can keep her out of any more sequels. At Nancy and her dad's joint funeral, Neil sees the nun standing by a grave. He walks over to her and she disappears. He sees that she was standing by Amanda Kruger's grave and realizes that she was actually the nun. Later, Neil falls asleep at his home where he has the same house Kristen made at the beginning of the film. A light suddenly comes on inside the model house, implying Freddy's survival, which sets up the events of the next film. This sequel is a lot better than the second film and is surprisingly really good for a third film in the franchise. Although it's a little cheesy in places, it is still a very fun and pretty scary film. This is in my eyes the last scary film and also the first funny film where Freddy's dream sequence become much more creative and have a certain element of humour to them. The film is a lot of fun, really well made and probably one of the most inventive movies in the series. I really enjoyed this film and it's one of my favourites in the franchise. This one is a must see for horror fans. I give it an A+.